when I think about the role that food plays in my nitric oxide production, what should I be eating to increase my nitric oxide levels or to keep them at a healthy level?
I think the same answer is for that too. It's not so much what we should be eating; it's what we should not be eating.
Okay.
So we'll cover those step by step. Number one, you have to avoid sugar and high glycemic index foods because sugar is a toxin, it's a poison. And let's think about what sugar is. So when we eat sugar or drink sugar beverages, right, whether it's sucrose, whether it's fructose, whether it's high fructose corn syrup, the end result inside the human is we see an increase in glucose. So elevation in blood sugar or blood glucose is diabetes, right? And now there's continuous glucose monitors that you can get anywhere. And everybody does this. So if you eat something and it causes an increase in your blood sugar, blood glucose, then you should avoid that. Because glucose, as the name applies, is glue, right? It's sticky. And if you have a soda and you spill it on your countertop, you come back the next day, it's sticky, right? Well, that's what happens inside the body. That sugar sticks to everything. It sticks to proteins, it sticks to enzymes. It binds to hemoglobin. And sugar stuck to hemoglobin is what we call hemoglobin A1C. And what is that? It's a marker of long-term glucose control. If you have a hemoglobin A1C of greater than 5.7, you're diabetic. So it's not just hemoglobin it sticks to the enzyme that makes nitric oxide. And in biochemistry and enzymology, enzymes have to be able to undergo conformational changes, right? So it transfers electrons from one donor to an acceptor, and that's how biochemistry is done. But if sugar is stuck to that enzyme, it locks it in some conformation and it can't do its job. For instance, it can't make nitric oxide. So sugar is an absolute poison, and it kills many enzymes and binds to everything.
And it lowers nitric oxide production?
Absolutely. That's why diabetics have a 10-time higher incidence of heart attack, stroke, all-cause mortality. That's why they develop neurological or peripheral neuropathy. That's why they have non-healing wounds. There's no nitric oxide. That's why they're developing diabetic retinopathy, macular degeneration, pancreatitis. I mean, all of that can be traced back to a lack of nitric oxide production because the sugar is stuck to the enzyme. The sugar destroys the oral microbiome and completely changes the ecology of the bacteria and completely shuts down nitric oxide production.
Just a bit of a tangent there. You mentioned that's why they have open wounds that don't
Yeah,
heal.
diabetic ulcers.
Okay, so nitric oxide's playing a healing role in wounds and scars?
Absolutely.
So I've got this scar on my head. I was playing football the other day. Someone ran into the back of my head and they passed out and got taken away by an ambulance. But I was just left with this big like scar on the back of my head, which I've had like glue stitched.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, I'm like, if I
Apply the nitric oxide serum, it'll stimulate blood flow to that. It'll improve cellular turnover and heal that wound and basically remediate the scar.
And how do I do that? Is it
Yeah, you take one pump from each side,
so one pump from this side?
and turn it around, one pump from the other.
Yeah.
And now if you apply that and mix it together, as soon as you mix it together, it starts to generate nitric oxide gas. So then that gas will diffuse into that tissue. It's going to increase blood flow, and it's going to mobilize stem cells, and it's going to improve cellular turnover and completely remodel that and heal that. And if it were an infection in there, it would kill the infectious bacteria.
Okay, well, we shall
See
see if that worked. So back on this point of food then. So sugar's bad.
Sugar's bad. Yeah, you got to eliminate sugar. And I think the benefits of it, like a straight ketogenic diet or a straight, vegan vegetarian diet, is just the elimination of sugar and carbs.
Yeah.
Right? But I think to answer your question, what should we be eating? I think you've got to eat a balanced diet in moderation. Americans are overfed. All you got to do is walk around and see the epidemic of obesity. Good high quality protein, good quality fats, and little or no carbs. And it's really that simple.
And why did you write a book about beetroots?
Beets, yeah, the beets hit the airwaves back in 2012 in the London Olympic Games.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of data coming out at the time of the benefits of beetroot juice on enhancing athletic performance. And there was a benefit of the nitric oxide being produced that could explain the improvement in athletic performance. The problem is these athletes were drinking liters and liters of beetroot juice, and causing a lot of gastric discomfort, causing diarrhea. Their urine and their feces would turn red, and a lot of people misinterpreted that as gastric bleeds or urinary bleeds. And then when I started looking at the products on the market, most of the beet products, the desiccated beet powders, provided zero nitric oxide benefit. They didn't contain any nitrate, no nitrite. They were just, we called them dead beets. They're a dead beet product. And so I thought, if consumers are out there looking for beets because they've been shown to enhance their performance, but that enhancement in performance was dependent upon the beet's ability to improve nitric oxide production in the body, then the non-scientist out there wouldn't know what to look for, right? They're buying products that aren't providing any benefit to them. And so years ago, we would do randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials, and we would take some of these commercial beet products that you can go to your local nutrition store or pharmacy, buy off the shelf, and we would use those as placebos in our clinical trials because it's the perfect placebo. So what I tried to do in that book is educate, okay, what is it about beets that are so important? What's the mechanism and what is necessary in those beets that can improve nitric oxide production? So again, everything I do is intended to educate and inform the consumer so that they know how to make informed, educated choices on the products they're taking or the foods they're eating or their oral hygienic practices.
I'm trying to find the page in your book, but there was a page in your book where you describe beetroot as the most underappreciated food in the history of eating.
Yeah, that may be in the Beat the Odds.
I thought it was in this book.
But if you go back to historical times and you look at the hieroglyphics on caves of the ancient cavemen, you know, people thought they were drinking wine because they would have these red stuff in this before battle. Mm-hmm. But what these ancient Egyptians were doing was they were drinking beet juice to improve their performance before they went into battle so that they were ready, they were energized, they improved their circulation. So that's the historical study on beets. And obviously, these were beets grown at a time when there were no herbicides, pesticides, and the soil was probably fertile. So these beets were full of nutrients, probably full of nitrate that provided the benefits of that. But unfortunately, today, the beets that are grown, at least in America, really are nutrient depleted, just like most of the food.
So would you recommend people eat beetroots?
No, because again, through our survey that we published in 2015, we realized that you really can't eat enough beets to get enough nitrate to improve your performance. And the other caveat is that if you're using mouthwash, you've got fluoride in your toothpaste or fluoride in your drinking water that you're mixing the beet powder in, you're not going to get a nitric oxide benefit from it.
There's a graph in front of me here, which I printed off, which shows the rise in antacid medications.
Oh yeah, from 2004 to so a 20-year period, we're seeing almost a quadrupling of the use of antacids. And this is globally, or is this in the U.S.?
That's worldwide, I believe.
Yeah, worldwide. Now, this is the problem. I mean, these antacids.
What is an antacid?
So it's a medication that's given orally to suppress stomach acid production.
Yeah.
And as a biochemist and physiologist, I can't think of nothing more damaging than to inhibit stomach acid production. Because stomach acid is required to break down proteins into amino acids, whether it's you're eating animal protein or plant-based protein. It's required for nutrient absorption. You need stomach acid to absorb B vitamins. You need stomach acid to absorb selenium, chromium, iodine, magnesium, iron. I mean, most nutrients, micronutrients, are absorbed in the lumen of the stomach. And if the stomach is not making stomach acid, then these nutrients are not absorbed. And most Americans, 75% of Americans are deficient in magnesium. 95% of Americans are deficient in iodine. I mean, it's a huge problem.
These are the brands like Gaviscon.
No, these are like the Prilosec, the Previcids, the Nexium, the prescription medications are omeprazole, pantoprazole. These today in the U.S., I think it's probably worldwide, you don't even need a prescription for these from your physician. You can go to your local drugstore and you can buy these, what we call proton pump inhibitors or PPIs.
What about Tums?
Over the counter. So there's a difference so Tums and things like baking soda are a buffer, right? Sodium bicarb or calcium carbonate, and it's a buffer. right? So if you have an acute bout of hypersecretion of acid, you can take a Tums or some buffer, some base, alkaline substance to neutralize the acid. Neutralizing acid is completely different than inhibiting its natural production in the pyloric cells of the stomach.
So what is the difference between have you heard of Gaviscon before?
Yes.
Yeah. What's the difference between like a Gaviscon?
Well, there's certain classes of antacids. There's what we call H2 blockers. There's proton pump inhibitors, and then there's the natural buffers that are just kind of neutralizing the acid environment in the stomach. Gaviscon, I'm trying to think what class that falls under. I don't think it's widely used here in the U.S. I mean, the main drugs used here are Prilosec, Nexium, Prevacid. Those are the over-the-counter. And then the main prescription medications are the omeprazole and the pantoprazole.
Gaviscon is a commonly used antacid brand, and the active ingredients are aluminium hydroxide and magnesium carbonate.
Oh, so Gaviscon. So number one, it's got aluminum in it, which you should absolutely be avoided. But yeah, it looks like a buffer. It's got an hydroxide, aluminum hydroxide, which is a strong base, so it's neutralizing the stomach acid production. But it's a neutralizing agent, but anything that contains aluminum, you should absolutely avoid.
As I've mentioned her a few times today, but my girlfriend's a breath practitioner. She runs a business called barleybreathwork.com, #ad. And one of the things she's talked to me a lot about is mouth breathing. And I know there's a relationship between nitric oxide and how we choose to breathe, whether it's through our nose or through our mouths. Can you explain to me that link?
When we talk about the enzyme that's found in the lining of the blood vessels, when we started this segment, that same enzyme is found in our epithelial cells, in our upper airways, in our sinuses. So just like exercise can activate nitric oxide production in the lining of the blood vessels, deep breathing, nasal breathing activates that enzyme in the epithelial cells of our sinuses. And so when we do nasal breathing, it's activating the enzyme to make nitric oxide. And now we're delivering that nitric oxide gas into the bronchioles, the lower airway. It's dilating those bronchioles. Moreover, it's dilating the pulmonary arteries. So now we're improving oxygen uptake, oxygen delivery, and that's why nasal breathing and deep breathing has been shown to lower blood pressure.
This is a pretty crazy graph I took from Google as well, which shows just how interested people are now getting in the subject of mouth breathing.
Oh yeah, again, going over the past 20 years. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of people. I mean, obviously your girlfriend, there's a Patrick McEwen in the UK.
Came into Dragon's Den, and I made him an offer in Dragon's Den.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think the benefits of that are pretty well, and mechanistically we understand the benefits of it. So the mouth breathers are not only bypassing this natural nitric oxide production pathway, but when you mouth breathe, it completely changes the microbiome. And so you're not only bypassing the nitric oxide producing in the upper airway, but you're inhibiting nitric oxide production in the mouth from the microbiome because you're fully oxygenating the mouth. It's changing the pH of the saliva and completely changes the microbiome and completely shuts down nitric oxide production.
Interesting.
So you have to, I mean, I'm a big fan of mouth taping, but for me, I know, and I watch my kids, but sometimes there's anatomical issues where there's obstructive airways and airway obstruction that has to be corrected by dental appliances or sometimes surgery. But the worst thing you can do is tape your mouth and your airway be constricted and, you suffocate. So before you do mouth taping, you need to get some imaging done from your dentist to make sure that your airway is open to where if you're forced to breathe through your nose, you can actually have oxygen exchange.
And is there anything else that I could and should be doing to increase and improve my nitric oxide levels that we haven't talked about yet?
Humming, there are certain frequencies. We've done this in looking at nitric oxide coming out of the exhaled breath when you're humming. So certain frequencies can activate this enzyme, and it's dependent upon the volume of the nasal sinuses. So there's not one frequency that would work in every single person, because the volume of your airways and oral cavity and sinuses was probably much different than mine.
Give me an example. Show me.
Well, if you just, like ohms, like you do in meditation or just simple humming, you could actually, so if I had my ozone or gas phase analyzer here, I could hum, and I could detect nitric oxide coming out of my exhaled breath.
Because of the frequency of the...
Because of the frequency and activating the nitric oxide synthase enzyme. But if you take older patients, and we've demonstrated this, it's published years ago in other other groups have demonstrated this. Older patients that their enzyme isn't making nitric oxide, whether they do nasal breathing or whether they do humming, there's no nitric oxide coming out. So again, this is an activator and a stimulator, but it's dependent upon the function of the enzyme that makes nitric oxide. If your enzyme is broken, humming, nasal breathing, exercise isn't going to produce any nitric oxide.
Is there anything else that I should be aware of if I'm trying to improve my nitric oxide levels?
I think it's doing the things that disrupt it. Get rid of fluoride, get rid of mouthwash, stop using antacids, stop eating sugar, anything that leads to an elevation in blood sugar. A balanced diet in moderation, moderate physical exercise, 20 to 30 minutes of sunlight a day.
Sunlight.
There's certain at both ends of the visible spectrum, both or the UV spectrum and the full spectrum infrared. So those frequencies and vibrations again stimulate nitric oxide release. So the UV has enough energy to where it'll knock nitric oxide bound to a cysteine thiol and protein, and then the UV spectrum will release nitric oxide bound to metals.
So you mean go out in the sunshine, but also those red light beds and stuff?
Yeah, the red light. I have a red light bed. I have an infrared sauna that uses red lights in it, and I use it every day
For nitric oxide production.
Yeah, and there's other benefits of light. It can stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis. It improves energy production. It can lower blood pressure. But yeah, lots of benefits of light therapy. And yet, we're programmed to not go outside. If we go outside, put on SPF 60 and intoxicate ourselves with these cancer-causing chemicals and sunscreen. I mean, it makes no sense.
What is the most important thing we haven't talked about that we should have talked about today, Dr. Nathan?
I think the future of, well, I don't think, I know, there's 3 levels of conviction. You think, you believe, and you know. I'm at the point of knowing now that the future of medicine and healthcare around the globe is going to be dependent upon nitric oxide product technology. Because I think we can inform and instruct people to stop doing things or start doing things. But the most difficult thing to do is to change people's habits and to get people out of their comfort zone and stop drinking soda waters, eliminate sugar to the best extent possible, get 20, 30 minutes of exercise a day, and completely change your diet. Compliance is an issue. People don't do that. We're programmed to want to take a pill to overcome everything. And there's that pill, nitric oxide is very important, but it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to overcome all your bad habits. But what it is going to do, it's going to correct a lot of the things that your bad habits are leading to a deficiency of.
Well, it's a good thing we have a lot of people that are devoted to finding new solutions to old problems. And you're certainly one of those people. And it's super fascinating because, as I said at the start of this conversation, I had no idea about any of this stuff beforehand. I had no idea. I'd not really even heard the word nitric oxide. And maybe I'd heard it in passing, but maybe I was confusing it with that NOS gas that people talk about and that some people inhale. And maybe because I hadn't added context and story and understanding to it, maybe I'd heard it in passing but didn't know what it was or meant. So it's really wonderful that you're leading the charge in educating the world on nitric oxide, because it's clearly a really, really important molecule in the broader picture of our health. And the more we understand it, the more we ask questions about it and have curiosity about it, the higher the probability that we're going to be able to build some of these therapies that prevent us from ending up in a state, as we've seen in some of these graphs, where we're deficient in nitric oxide and then have to deal with the downstream consequences of that. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. It's really, really important. I'm going to ask you one final question, which is the question left by our previous guest.
Kim.
They don't know who they're leaving it for, and they write it into this diary. So the question that's been left for you is, are you happily or unhappily mated, and why?
Happily or unhappily mated? One of my biggest challenges in life is maintaining balance, right? Because I've been so focused on discovery and research and leaving a lasting legacy and making innovations and doing things in the scientific and medical community that many people said couldn't be done. And so the problem is there's always a deficiency. I've got young kids. I spend a lot of time away, and that's I'm happily mated, but there's deficiencies, right? Because again, my challenge is always maintaining balance. Work, home life, kind of maintaining, my spiritual, my it's mental, it's physical, and it's spiritual health. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to do better at that now, but you can't there's always sacrifice,
Mm.
right? And we just have to pick our sacrifices, and so I've got to choose to do better.
Yeah. Everything has a trade-off, as many of my guests have told me. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for the work that you do. Where do people, if people want to find out more about you, if they want to read more, they should certainly get this book, which you've just released, called The Secret of Nitric Oxide. I'll link it below for anyone that wants to have a read of this book. I highly recommend you do, because it gives an even more comprehensive understanding of everything we've talked about today. And it's incredibly accessible, which is always critically important to me. But if they want to find out more, if they want to understand the products that you sell and anything else, where do they go?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm here to educate and inform on nitric oxide. This latest book, The Secret of Nitric Oxide, Bringing the Science to Life, really chronicles both my kind of journey through science and medicine, as you revealed, kind of my early years and kind of what motivated me to go in this space. But I think more importantly, it tells the story of nitric oxide, what it is, what led to a Nobel Prize for its discovery, what you can do to prevent the loss of this molecule. So you can go to nathansbook.com, or you can get it anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I've got a YouTube channel, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, Nitric Oxide, where we provide education, information, latest scientific information on nitric oxide. You can find me on social media, Instagram, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan. And then for those who want to follow our product journey and, bringing forth safe and effective product technology, that's N101.com. So it's the letter N, the number one, letter O, number one.com. But, we make products that release nitric oxide.
Dr. Nathan Bryan, thank you so much for your time today, being so incredibly generous. But thank you so much for educating the world in such an articulate and accessible way on a subject that few of us knew very little about. It's incredibly important work, and it's inspired me to think again about my diet and about the decisions I make, the habits I have, about exercise, about sunlight exposure, about my oral microbiome, all of these things. So thank you so much for that. It's a real gift, and I appreciate you taking the time today.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure being with you.